Welcome back to the Pursuit of Progress podcast. I'm Adam Lang here with my co-host Ben Adams, and today we're diving into a topic that's sparking a lot of conversation. It's about how President Trump's economic policies could impact the American consumer, your money, and your jobs. So no matter where you stand politically, your wallet doesn't care who's in office. What really matters is just how these policy changes affect interest rates, taxes, the job market, and the cost of everyday goods. We're going to break down today 5 major policy areas that could shape the economy in 2025 and beyond. So stick around to find out who's the real winners and who are the real losers, at least who they potentially could be as we go into this year. Ben, what is up, brother? How are you doing today? Happy.
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Good, man. Happy February. We're recording this last couple days of January, but this will be coming out in Feb. So hopefully the new month is treating as well when this episode releases.
Yeah. Can you believe that January is already in the books? I mean, it seemed like Christmas was here, and then we're off to the races here in 2025.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. I think this is that month where it goes by quick. February always is a quick month, and then as soon as it's over with, it's getting into spring, it's warming up, everybody's getting in better moods, staying daylight later. I just love that like momentum shift of just everybody's happiness, positivity, ability to be outdoors later in the afternoons and evenings. Mm-hmm. Such a nice time of year for that.
I'm that same way. I would say January and February are my least favorite months of the year. But you're already starting to know the daylight, like it's starting to stay a little bit lighter now. Mm-hmm. And then once you hit March, though, which is 30 days away or less, then at that point we get daylight savings, get some nicer weather, and then we are off to the races.
Hell yeah, man. Well, let's just jump right.
I was going to ask, did you give our warning on this, that some information may be triggering?
This might be a triggering episode, you guys. So what I just want everybody to realize is if it gets too intense for you, there should be a red button on your phone and just push that. Yeah. It's a pause button or it's a stop button. Just push that, walk away slowly, and when ready, and only when you feel ready, come back and listen to the rest of this.
That's right. You need to come back and listen to the rest, but we're not here to talk politics. What this is about is discussing how some of the possible policy changes could impact you and your wallet. You want to be informed, and you ultimately want to know, how is this going to impact me on a personal level? Remember, what's happening in your economy is more important than what's happening in the American economy and the political economy.
Mm-hmm. Very, very, very true. Let's start with the first policy, the first biggest, I think, probably talking point out of all of these, at least the one that's probably getting the most attention in the news. And that's just about interest rates. So just the, forecast of what's going to happen over the remainder of this year with interest rates, and just, how that might affect other things outside of that, going further into this year. What's kind of your sentiment on this first topic?
Well, Trump won, as you mentioned, I mean, his focus is that interest rates are too high. He wants them lowered. He was very in touch his first term about interest rates. He's always been a critic of that, and he's come out and said that he wants interest rates lowered. Now, I think if you are, for people like us who are in the real estate and lending markets, that's exciting to hear, because lower interest rates are something that would impact me personally in a positive way. I would be able to go help more families. So would you. So that's exciting to hear. But then what would that look like? Kind of that's more short term. What would the medium and long term effects look like?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely that's the overall expectation with Trump now being in office, is that interest rates are going to get lowered. What's your, we don't have to go dive too deep into this, but this has changed a lot over the last 6 months on just what these actual predictions are. Right now we're hovering just over 7%. Do you think by the end of this current 2025 year, do you think we're going to be below 6%, or do you think we're still going to be above 6%?
The only way that we'd be below 6 would be with Trump intercession. The Fed has come out. They made this announcement in December, and then in January they did not lower the Fed funds rate. So initially they were forecasting 4 to 5 rate cuts in 2025. Now they're forecasting only 1 to 2. And so the market has not reacted favorably from that. Interest rates are in the mortgage world, interest rates are actually higher now than when they were back in September before any of the recent Fed cuts. And so, based off of the sentiment, other analysts, how the market has reacted, it's unlikely that they're going to come down substantially unless there is some type of intercession. Now, if rates do come down, that would be great because it's going to impact affordability in a positive way. People are going to be able to qualify either for more home, or their payment is going to be less on their existing homes that they're looking at. For folks that are in higher interest rate mortgages, they would be able to reduce those down. It's possible they could save hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars a month. So there is some real appeal to lowering rates. And I think a lot of what I've observed is that there's been a lot of home buyers that are just waiting on the sidelines. Folks that are interested in refinancing and haven't done anything because they've been waiting. In the first part of this year, even though rates are still at a new normal, which is higher than what they've been, I've noticed and observed that calls are starting to pick up. I'm getting more inquiries. And so I'm already starting to see some of that, which is encouraging. But, if rates came down 1.5 points, would we all of a sudden have those crazy price wars and, a line of home buyers waiting outside of open houses, 50 offers on, do you remember how insane that was?
Yeah, we definitely just need to get a little bit lower, but not go back to that extreme. I think when people are kind of able at least to make the numbers work, and we're in that, maybe 4.5% to 6% range. I just think in my mind, if we were just kind of always in that range moving forward, that would be a great place for everybody.
Yeah, and I always want to point out, because this is a lot of times the thing that doesn't get discussed when it comes to interest rates. Now, if you're someone that is a saver or a retiree and you're relying on fixed income from high yield savings accounts or fixed income instruments, when rates come down, lending and borrowing interest rates come down, but interest rates on these other accounts also come down. So for folks that are relying on interest income from their checking, savings, high yield accounts, they're going to be earning less, and that's who a potential loser would be if this did happen.
Very interesting, and I've never really thought about that side of it. We'll jump into the second one here. So, obviously we could talk a lot more about just interest rates, but I feel like we talk about that a lot anyway. So let's kind of talk through some of these other ones that maybe we haven't discussed quite as much. So number 2, I think this one's super fascinating, and it would be really interesting to see what happens with this one. So number 2 is just the policy of potentially eliminating the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, and what that could mean for taxes.
I mean, it's just so tough to imagine eliminating the IRS. Isn't that just like mind-boggling to even think about?
Yeah. But I think if nothing else, a lot of this Doge stuff with just the efficiency, and I can't remember the exact number, but I think they were saying that the IRS could run with like a quarter of the staff that they currently have and be doing the same thing. I don't know. I think that one's an area where there's probably is a lot of opportunity to help that one.
Yeah, and ultimately, we talk about the American consumer a lot on this channel, but when you look at our government, how our government is managing, what the fiscal responsibility is, it's very, very low. When you look at our operating budget, we've been operating at a deficit for year after year, decade after decade, and then you have our national debt that is just ballooning, and that's very concerning, because it means that we're not operating at a surplus. We're operating at we're spending more consistently than we're bringing in revenue. So, you can look at the revenue side and try and get that up. Well, that's taxes. You can increase revenue or you can reduce costs. And right now, just as you alluded to, I mean, there's so much misappropriation of spending when it comes to our budget. I mean, redundancy, pork in in a lot of these bills, and so it's really just figuring that out. To give a brief history on our tax system over the last 200 years, we used to rely, on a majority basis, tariffs from other countries. They would get, there'd be an import tax if a country was gonna, if they were gonna bring their goods in, there would be a tax for that. And then starting in the early 1900s is when the withholding started to happen from consumers' paychecks. And so it's kind of, if you're a wage earner, meaning that you get a W-2, we're all used to that now. Your taxes are withheld from your paycheck. Well, it didn't used to be that way. And so as the years and the decades have gone by, like the American consumer, and this is what I'm always saying, like the American consumer is getting taken advantage of, and they're kind of just, their rights are kind of slowly eroding over the years. And I'm not here to say, is this policy right or wrong? But it is, what I do like about some of these things is that it kind of is a little bit of a disruption to the way that we've been operating as a nation, and it's starting to at least spark some conversation.
Yep, took the words out of my mouth. Yeah, it's sparking conversation. It's at least getting people to talk about things that have been done a certain way for as long as we can remember, and at least second guessing that, and maybe there are better ways to do certain things, and this seems like one that there's a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah. Now, one of the arguments for a possible con would be, you have the pros and the cons. So the pros would be the tax system would be much more simplified, which would reduce compliance costs. And if you're a business, because there are, larger businesses that, as far as just being compliant with the IRS, they will spend hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars on just staying compliant. And so those would be potential winners. Now, potential losers, or some of the cons, would be lower income households where there's just not as big of a benefit that there would be for some of the higher income individuals. And then folks that are, and then just like public services was some of the, when I was doing the research, individuals who rely on public services, if the revenue wasn't there to fund some of these public services, and you're seeing that a little bit in the news, some of these public services that rely on grants, like specifically, I read an article about Meals on Wheels not having access to the grant money that they need to, deliver their food. So those are some potential possible fallout concerns with public services.
Yeah. Just, on a personal note, I got audited by the IRS with my business about 10 years ago, and they literally had a woman from Grand Junction drive all the way over to Glenwood Springs Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. She spent probably 6 hours a day at my business for 2 weeks straight.
Wow.
Just to tell me that I didn't owe a penny. Just crazy, man. I mean, and that was 10 years ago. So I can only imagine just the bigger businesses and like you were saying about the hundreds of thousands of dollars, just the wasted resources that go into some of those audits.
And so did this IRS agent set up shop in your office then?
Yeah. We had an open extra storage room in the back that she put up a temporary desk and had all these, banker boxes with all these, all my accounting records. After the first day, I had to ask her if she could please park her Jeep Cherokee around the side of the business, because before first day, she just parked her Jeep just in the very first parking spot right in front of our front door of the business with a giant, government plate. I'm like, thanks, lady. So had to have a little chat with her.
How did that conversation go? Did she comply?
She was. I don't want to go down. I don't want everybody to listen to this and think poorly of me, but she lived very closely up to the expectation of what you would think an IRS somebody that's auditing you would act and look like and be like. She fit that mold pretty much spot on. So
Interesting. You know,
yeah.
I've done a couple loans for some IRS agents.
Hmm.
Do you know that?
No.
And one thing that's interesting is that they, you know, they're armed. You know, because you think about that, and they, you know, there's a division. I don't know if all agents are, but like they actually have like a police force within the IRS.
A tax man. Sometimes, those are the criminals that probably they got a lot to lose, and yeah, they might be pushing back when you go knocking on their door.
Wesley Snipes.
He was a U.S. Marshal. Unless there's another movie that I don't know
He
about.
spent time in prison though for tax evasion.
Oh yeah,
multiple years.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, before we move on to the next one, just wanted to share a very, very special sponsorship that we've really been fortunate enough to have over the past year, and we would not be where we are today without them. So, with that being said, if you, yes, I'm talking to you, if you are a property owner in Tucson, Arizona, looking for reliable and hassle-free property management, look no further than Roadrunner Property Care. Whether you own a vacation rental, a second home, or an investment property, Roadrunner Property Care takes the stress out of managing your property. From routine maintenance to security checks and great guest management, they handle it all, so you don't have to. With their trusted local team, you get 24/7 property monitoring, scheduled maintenance, and personalized service to keep your investment in top shape year round. So visit roadrunnerpropertycare.com today to learn more, or give them a call and see how they can help protect and maintain your property so you can focus on what really matters. Roadrunner Property Care. Yes, that's roadrunnerpropertycare.com. roadrunnerpropertycare.com. Your property, their priority.
Amazing.
What
just absolutely
a company.
Amazing. That's you know, I love the sponsor, but how you read that, just you put your heart and your soul into that. So
yeah, I got almost to the end, and then that tongue twister. Roadrunnerpropertycare.com. I said that's roadrunnerpropertycare.com. Roadrunnerpropertycare.com. All right, guys, let's move on to policy number 3. This one is also something that is front and center on all of the news right now, with Donald Trump speaking specifically on tariffs and the cost of goods. Ben already alluded a little bit to this in the last point, but tariffs are, I think,
this is kind of tied in with the IRS, where if we eliminated the IRS, or if the IRS was eliminated, then this likely would have to take its place and go into effect, and that would be tariffs. Now, you may have seen some recent news. There was a little bit of a political or diplomatic back and forth between President Trump and the president of Colombia recently over the repatriation of some migrants. So back at the end of January, there were, I think, around 160 Colombian migrants that were sent to be repatriated to Colombia, meaning that they're being sent from the U.S. back to Colombia. And the Colombian government rejected them. And at that time, President Trump threatened a 25% tariff on all Colombian imports. And immediately, the Colombian president threatened the same thing for American imports. But then after a couple of hours, he reversed his stance on the economic threat, and then also allowed the Colombian migrants to come back to Colombia, and also use the Colombian presidential plane, to help expedite their return. So it went from, no, you're not returning those migrants, and we're going to put these tariffs on you, to how can we help expedite this? So there's a lot to unpack there, just from a diplomatic relations perspective. But Trump has also talked about putting tariffs on China, Mexico, Canada, and then the Colombian experience was the most recent one that I read about.
I think it's in my opinion, personal opinion, I think it's the best strategy, and I think something that would have a lot of kind of secondary benefits that people don't think about as much. And the big pushback for a lot of people on a tariff that live in the United States is they assume that by having these tariffs on certain foreign products, those products that these Americans still want to purchase are now going to be more expensive. And while that is going to be true to an extent, I think the part that a lot of people don't think about, though, is people will now be faced with the decision to, instead of paying a higher dollar amount for that international product, there's now going to be local domestic companies being created to make those same
Yeah.
products and benefit from that competitive advantage they have by not having a tariff. And then we'll be able to start reinvesting our money instead of into foreign countries back into our own. And just that benefit of the improvement of building up from within, and really just supporting our own staff and employees and just residents of the United States. I think that would just be something that wouldn't be noticed immediately, but after a few years, I think would have a huge impact.
Yeah, and so for those of you that don't understand or don't know what a tariff is, so when something is produced, manufactured, supplied, or sourced outside of the United States, that's what President Trump is referring to, putting a tariff or a cost on those goods, services, supplies that are then imported. So he's threatening up to 25%, and then that would take the place of a lot of the federal income tax. And so what Adam is saying there is that that would encourage Americans to buy domestic, and that's why frankly America has not been able to compete in a lot of these different industries, is because things can be sourced so much easier and cheaper abroad. But if you didn't have to pay federal income tax and you just had to pay more for foreign goods, like at least you would have the option.
Mm-hmm.
You would have the if I want this foreign good, I can go, pay 150% of what I used to pay, but then I don't have any federal income tax. I mean, something to think about.
Yeah, I remember right before Trump, won the election. I know that Elon had a massive new Tesla factory already breaking ground just across the southern border in Mexico. And I think he put that completely on hold once there started to look like there was a good chance that Trump would win, just for that reason. I mean, this tax, this tariff, whatever we want to call it, maybe just this penalty to really keep, these Americans from also just choosing to support and purchase from other American companies.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thought. And I always go back to the withholding. And when you look at your paycheck at the end of the year and you realize how much is going to, federal and state governments. And again, I want to support, my country in every way that I can, regardless of who is president. I'm proud to be an American. I believe that I have certain responsibilities as a citizen, but there's something that I read where, like, the reason that the government withholds taxes from your paycheck is because if you had to write a check to the government at the end of the year, like, how alarming would that be for every, if you're an American and you had to write a $15,000 check at the end of the year, 10,000, 30, I mean, how alarming, it would wake Americans up.
Yep.
But because this is withheld, again, we're not asking these questions. We're not having these conversations. Everyone's lulled to sleep because, at least in our lifetime, this is how it's always been done.
Mm-hmm.
So who are some of the winners and losers if this tariff policy is imposed?
Yeah, I would say the biggest winners is just United States of America, Uncle Sam, but specifically the U.S. manufacturers, domestic workers, any sort of industry that has reduced foreign competition. As far as the losers, I would say, there are some consumers that are going to be losing just because they are paying a higher dollar amount now for the same product. I think, again, that's a short-term loss rather than a long-term loss. And then also other losers would just be any businesses that are really reliant on those imported goods and any sort of global trade relationships.
At least consumers would have the option, though, like we talked about, where you'd have the option of buying in the USA or not, and being made in the USA would actually it would mean a lot more.
Mm-hmm. So the fourth policy, so we got two left, you guys. Number 4 is energy policies and how that can affect the economy. Ben, I don't know too much on this one as far as the notes you put. Why don't you share your thoughts on this first?
Yeah, with the energy policies, Trump's strategy is always been very focused on increasing domestic energy production, specifically fossil fuels over renewables, deregulating environmental policies. And for example, the U.S. has already withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement again. The first time that happened was during Trump's first term, and then he immediately withdrew from that again. And this is one of those things where, for me personally, I kind of going back to the delayed gratification conversation that we had a couple episodes ago. I believe that long term, renewable, responsible energy long term is going to be in the best interest of the environment of our planet. And there might be some short-term sacrifices for that, but I do believe that we need to really start transitioning to that. And so, me personally, and I know that you have family that is in oil and gas, and it's just balancing a little bit of a fine line, because if you are going to fossil fuels, you're going to get a little bit more now. There's going to be a little bit more of a benefit now, but then what is that long term going to look like? And so that's really the balancing act here. Interestingly enough, and this kind of caught me off guard a little bit, is that I think as I was doing some of the research for this, there are certain players within the oil and gas industry that are actually concerned about this, because it's slowing down or inhibiting their renewable energy initiatives, meaning that they're having a longer term approach and starting to understand that renewable energy is really, we're talking 30, 50, 100 years from now, like that is where it's headed, long term, it is headed towards renewable energy. And by, taking a couple steps backward, it's going to compromise some of those longer term plans. So even though those companies are still, in fossil fuel businesses right now.
Yep. Yeah, I think that, these are all very important things to be focused on as we're, progressing in the world. I think the issue is there's other things, in my opinion, that are maybe more important in the short term to get back on track, like our military, or just fixing our internal country where we're at a place of abundance, and then we can attack this with full force, But when we're up against a wall to begin with, this is just one of these policies that are just so hard to, for me at least, to be 100% in on, knowing that all these other negative things are still happening that are, I think, in my opinion, more important in the short term.
I know that you have a lot of connections in the a lot of sources in the oil and gas industry. Have you gotten an opportunity to have conversations like this as far as like what their opinions are?
Not a whole lot. Yeah, just to be honest with you, we really haven't talked about this too much yet. I definitely am interested to kind of get my dad's perspective and some of my other family members over the holidays. When we had our Christmas parties, we just didn't really talk too much about this. But I've had several cousins that went to the University of Wyoming and followed into the petroleum engineering field that my parents, or I should say my dad and my dad's siblings, are also all involved in. And a lot of these cousins had to totally do an audible and change industries altogether just because of how dismal it was looking in Denver. So if nothing else, I'm just hoping that it's a little bit of resurgence, in places like Denver, Houston. There's other areas that have also been affected negatively just with loss of a lot of job opportunities in those cities from this industry just changing a lot. So I guess on the flip side of that, in Denver, though, there's also a ton of renewable energy jobs in Boulder, Broomfield, different parts of Denver. So, I don't see that being negatively affected too much where any of those people are losing their jobs, but it could have a potentially effect on that side of things too.
Interesting.
Well, let's wrap up on the fifth and final policy, immigration and the job market. This is obviously one of the biggest ones in the news right now as we're filming this episode. There was a big story just earlier this week how I think there was 50 illegal immigrants that were all picked up here in Denver at a party that was going on, and they were the Tren de Aragua, I forgot how you say that, part of that gang. So a pretty big score for the ICE here in Denver with getting some of those people caught.
Yeah, and this one is a tricky one. It's also a sensitive one as well.
Yep.
With my job, I get the opportunity to get to work with a lot of immigrants, and I have always said that I have incredible respect for immigrants because I have found that they are just some of the most hardworking, most disciplined. And you know what about immigrants? A lot of the immigrants that I work with, they still believe in the American dream, and that's why they're here. I think as Americans that have been here for 2, 3, 4 generations, we get very complacent, we get very comfortable because we live in the country of comfort. But when you've experienced what life is like in a third world country where you're just trying to get sanitary, you're trying to get sanitary water, use a sanitary toilet, you're trying to get enough food for yourself, and have the resources and the opportunity to provide for your family, it gives you a very different perspective. And so I also think that's why a lot of Americans, we have a tendency to not appreciate. There are so many Americans that love to hate on America. Have you experienced that?
The Ellen DeGeneres topic, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about anything in specific. I'm just talking about it's kind of popular now to hate America. And
Yeah.
I believe that, I still believe that I believe in America. I believe that America is one of the greatest countries in the world. I'm not saying that we don't have problems, we don't have faults, we don't have things to figure out, but I am saying I believe in the American dream. I believe that it is the land of opportunity. And then also, just on a personal note, my kids, they're first generation Americans on their mom's side. Their mom and that entire side of the family are immigrants. And so I have a very unique perspective on just how it's something that is a little more sensitive to me. But if under this plan, up to 11 million undocumented workers could be deported, that makes up about 6% of the U.S. labor market, and that would probably allow for labor shortages in agriculture, construction, hospitality, and a lot of those goods and related services could be increased.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I don't think this was something that I thought about, but the federal deficit could rise as well, just because of the lower tax contributions. I read an article that said, there's an estimated 900 billion in federal revenue coming from some of these immigrants.
I think about the ski towns here in Colorado, and when I was living up in Aspen, the winter ski labor force, just to make the in addition to the restaurants, bars, all that kind of stuff, but specifically the ski resort itself, getting those lift operators, just all the different positions that are required just to make that place operate and run efficiently and have everybody that's paying to go there for the day skiing have a great experience. A ton of that labor force was, J2, it's a J visa. I forgot the name of the visa, but where, people from different countries, that has gotten so much more restrictive now where it's much more challenging for these people to come over with these visas. All these ski areas this season specifically are having all these shortages of labor. There's been lift lines up to 3 hours just to get on a single chairlift at the bottom of Park City over the holidays. Just insane how on even just like a recreational example like skiing, but how this limited or the 6% of less labor force, just all types of jobs are going to be affected, or at least industries are going to be seeing these issues with just not enough staff, higher prices, maybe reduced hours. It could go to a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I know. My son was asking me today about, because this is also in the news, and this would go under the immigration category. restricting or repealing the birthright citizenship. He was just asking about how that works and how if you're born here, you're a citizen. And I was explaining that to him, that there's a lot of people that come here illegally to have their child, and their child is then automatically a U.S. citizen, whether they're here legally or not, and how it's possible that could be changing. And it's crazy to think that could change, because that's how it's been, I think, always.
Yeah, I think
At
so.
least as long as I've been alive. So it's just, and I'm not saying that I endorse or don't endorse these things that we're talking about, but it is good to really think through and start to have some important conversations about this stuff.
It's crazy that, it's only been about a month since Trump took office, not even a month, but 3 weeks. And it just feels like there's already been a lot that's kind of been going on. And I'm sure that's always the case when they have a new president. But it just seems like, man, there's a lot already kind of going through the news feeds here, and a lot of different stuff that we haven't really even thought of before, with Canada and the Gulf of America and Greenland. I mean, there's just like so many crazy topics just to discuss, and it hasn't even been a month yet.
Yeah, one thing that I find interesting is, watching and observing Trump. He always gets everyone to play his game. With the Trump of America stuff, and saying that, we're going to take over Greenland, and all of a sudden you have the Greenland president comment, and it's like everyone is, he gets everyone to start playing his game.
Yeah.
Apparently, though, Google did rename some of those
The Gulf of
national
America
monuments, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
think if you go on Google, I think it says, I haven't done it yet, but I think it says Gulf of America.
And Mount McKinley and Mount Denali, and there's some.
And I don't really want to get into, like, I don't
No.
like all the back and forth there. It's like we're going to change the names of these monuments every, I don't think that's a good thing.
Yep, agreed. All right, guys. Well, I think that was a good kind of a sneak peek at what maybe to expect out of Trump's, upcoming year ahead of him, with a lot of projected changes going on here, both in Colorado and just across the nation and world. Just a quick recap of these 5 things we talked about today. Number 1, just how these lower interest rates could make borrowing cheaper, but increase inflation. Number 2, the concept of eliminating the IRS and how that could simplify taxes, but it will definitely shift the burden to lower income earners. Definitely also talked, number 3, about tariffs, how they may protect U.S. businesses, but they are going to raise prices for a lot of consumers here in the U.S. Number 4, energy deregulation could lower costs now, but that could also hurt sustainability long term. And then last but not least, number 5, how these mass deportations may reduce competition for jobs, but they also might create labor shortages. Ben, any final words on those 5 talking points about our man Donnie D?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a challenge to our listeners. Which policies do you think will have the biggest impact on your finances? That's obviously going to vary from person to person, but please share with us, send us a message, let us know in the comments, and let us know why. We'd love to hear from you. And is there something that you're looking forward to? Is there something that is of particular concern? Let's get the conversation started.
Let's get that conversation started. Let's dance, baby. All right, guys. Well, this was a fun episode today. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Don't forget, please make sure you can do us a solid and share the show with any friends, family, coworkers, anybody that you think would also get some value from learning tips that you can take action on today to pursue progress. So thanks again for joining us today, Ben.
Love you guys, and we'll see you next week.
See you guys.